remember when I was in Amsterdam, and I heard that Berry Place had this new sannyasi, had just arrived in Berry Place, and freshly initiated by Srila Prabhupada, and somehow I had a feeling to go, had to get to Berry Place to meet this person. I just knew I'd have something to do with him, and he came to Berry Place. I know he really inspired all the devotees every night, anyone who was at Berry Place at the time. This was 71, 72. Everyone would just rush for the evening kirtan and the lecture, because they knew that this particular devotee was going to be giving the lecture. Srila Prabhupada said to him personally at the time, "Your college preaching program is my dream, and my dream come true." I remember one event, 1972, Kensington Town Hall. Prabhupada gave this incredible lecture, and then a born-again Christian stood up at the back and said, "What about Jesus?" And Prabhupada just looked at the man, quite disgusted, couldn't believe he actually stood up and said it. And then he just looked over at this devotee and he went. And that devotee stood up, he did his obeisances, Bandeham Shri Guru. And even at the beginning of the event, I was stood at the back looking at him with his dunda, and I was thinking, he looks like a gunslinger or something, you know. And when he stood up, I thought, this man's going to get it real bad. He's going to get it so bad. When he started to do that Bande hums, oh, he's had it. This guy's really had it. Whoa. Anyway, he did have it, and at the end, everyone stood up, gave this devotee a standing ovation. The next day on the morning walk, Srila Prabhupada said, "I want you all to learn how to preach like this devotee." So we all know him. If you were there in the early 70s, I think made many of you a devotee, I think. Yeah? Many of us were made devotees by this person, gave us great faith in Krishna. So let's welcome Revatinandana, Prabhu.
Hold it. Oh, you got it? Okay. Oh, Haribo, Prabhu. It's wonderful to see you all the last couple of days. There's an expression, he's a hard act to follow. So Guru Das talked about 5 of the 6 devotees who established the yatra, but he left himself out. One time I heard Srila Prabhupada refer to Guru Das, "Oh, Guru Das, yes, he's a big sweet ball." There were times along the way when I was a brahmachari, when we were in India. I was having a health problem one time that was causing me sore distress. I didn't know I'd only been a couple of weeks in India. We weren't all the best looked after brahmacharis. It was a new adventure to just be in India, and I had a problem, and I didn't know where to turn. And I didn't know Guru Das very well, but of all the people there, I could just tell that he would help me. He'd been to India before. And Guru Das brought me to the doctor, right? And he paid for it and everything because I was a penniless brahmachari. And I just remember that he's such a kind person. He mentioned the special qualities, and it's a fact that the 6 devotees that established this yatra all had some uniquely special qualities. And I think warmth and compassion are 2 ways to describe Guru Das Prabhu that don't quite measure up, but we'll try with that for a start. They want us to be kind of brief, and we're going to have everyone talk today, so I'm going to you know me. And so what Bhumade was talking about Kensington Town Hall, he doesn't know what I went through that night. Because you see, it was Prabhupada's lecture. When the man asked the question, Prabhupada made a face. And he said, "I do not want to answer this question." He said it kind of under his breath. And then he looked at me and said, "Revatinandana, Maharaj, you answer." Well, of course, I hadn't expected to be speaking that night. And when I went Bande Ham Shri Guru, it wasn't quite the same mood that Bhumade had caught. I had a complete blank in my mind. I did not know what I was going to say as I walked up to the microphone. And all I could think of was, Prabhupada has asked you to do it, you have to do something, you have to trust Krishna. And the words came out probably better than as well as I've ever spoken. And it worked out very nicely because the intelligence came on the spot, as if upon demand from, well, this is something that I thought of as you said that, if for a couple of minutes, just to make one brief point to everyone, is that we have an institution, and in an institution there is a form, a structure that has grown up, which we call ISKCON, or the Krishna Consciousness Movement, but it's made of innumerable individual devotees. And the wonderful thing about Krishna consciousness is that it's a very personal thing. Each one of us is a very special person, and each one of us has the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the most special person, sitting in our heart all the time. Because in the beginning, we're not completely pure at heart. At first, we need an external guide who is actually a manifestation of that Supreme Person, and that's how we appreciate our spiritual master. And devotional service to Lord Krishna is actually a process of, it's a very individual process of spiritual growth, whereby if we take on some responsibility, whatever comes to us, I have to somehow or other get this prasadam preparations cooked, or I have to see to it that the hall is booked for a program, or whatever our service may be. There's so many things that come to us. It may be something like that day for me when I had no idea how I could possibly suddenly step in and substitute for Srila Prabhupada, right? And all I could do was trust the Super Soul to give me the words, and they came flowing out of my mouth, and I didn't even know where they were coming from. Actually, whenever I speak, it's always been pretty much like that. That was just an exceptionally vivid example to me. I remember I just marveled at it afterward. I just felt really humble and really lucky. And I've had that feeling many, many, many times. I felt really, really lucky to be here in the British Yatra during the early 70s because of the incredibly bright faces. Prabhupada used to say my disciples are bright faces, and I never saw such bright faces as the ones that used to dance before Radha Landanishwara at Seven Berry Place every night during our evening program. The young ladies and gentlemen who had become Vaishnavas were so joyful. They were so ecstatic. They had such nice, humble service attitudes. All over the world, devotees are nice. Somehow or other, if you take a rather genteel and civilized country like Britain, and then you take their Vaishnavas, well, they have such nice material qualities, and then when they're lit up with spiritual life, they become exceptionally appealing devotees, and I always felt really pleased with my companionship while I was in England. My business was to teach at that time. That was my assignment, but I always felt like everybody was simply bringing me out, and that my pupils were my teachers all the time here, because they all had such good qualities that I could always take inspiration from. So if there's any bit of advice I could give to a devotee, I would say this. Try to take on what you can for Krishna as you chant Hare Krishna, because chanting Hare Krishna is our spiritual strength. It purifies our heart. The more pure we are at heart, the more we can get a little inspiration from within as we serve our external guide, who is our spiritual master. And the more we expand our responsibility, the more we will make ourselves eligible to receive inspiration from the Super Soul within our hearts. And ultimately, it's a combination of the external guru and the internal guru that will take us back to Godhead in that way. So, you're all such wonderful, big-hearted devotees, and I just wish you all the best of good fortune in expanding your service in that way, and continue to be joyful. So, Hare Krishna. All I recall after is that Prabhupada, the kirtan ended, and Prabhupada put on his spectacles, and he had what I'm sure must have been his own Srimad Bhagavatam in front of him. This was, of course, long before. This was, again, it was in early '68. It was long before he had actually translated any of it. But he was reading from it, and then he was speaking. And I remember noticing that as he spoke, a lot of times his eyes were closed, or if he was looking out, it was like basically just looking around the room, he didn't seem to be presenting himself or kind of advertising himself or trying to appear as a holy man like I had seen a couple other gurus around that were doing like that. And he seemed like he was very just, I remember noticing he's just speaking this teaching right from this book, and then he's explaining it. I do recall specifically that in that particular lecture he remarked, so now they are saying that everyone is God. You are God, I am God. He said, so there are so many gods laying down in the street. Right? He said, so for you, God does not mean very much if you think that. He said, G-O-D-D-O-G. What is the difference? You say you are God, I say you are a dog. But if we are all God and gods are laying down in the street, then what is the good is no different than being dog. And he talked about the opulences. And that's a paraphrase, obviously. It's not exactly what he said, but I remember that he specifically mentioned G-O-D-D-O-G. And I was going from one viewpoint to the other right at that time, and immediately it just struck me right away that that's right. You know, obviously, how has God gotten into such a bad spot as so many people like me that were practically almost living in the street at that time, or were living in the street in some cases? Cooking one day in the temple kitchen, mostly I was out on Sankirtan, but in this particular day I was helping cook a prasadam with Aniruddha. And Prabhupada, he came back in from seeing Prabhupada. He said, you know, Prabhupada just told me we're not supposed to use mustard seeds or mustard oil or fenugreek anymore in the cooking. He said, just don't use them in the temple cooking. Right? He wanted it kept basically simple spices and basically simple techniques, straightforward, you know, with the cumin seed, chili, asafoetida and the chaunts, etc. But he specifically mentioned about mustard seed and mustard oil as well as fenugreek. People don't know this. Later on in India, he remarked one time, my godbrothers, they generally prefer mustard oil, but I like ghee, he said. He gave a lecture. Hopefully it is on tape somewhere. But he gave a lecture from the Vyasa-san, what was usually Bhagavad Gita class. He talked entirely. It might have been a Sunday afternoon lecture at a Sunday feast. It could have been. I believe it was light, daytime, and maybe it was late afternoon. But one way or the other way, he spoke specifically about kirtan. And he said things about kirtan that I never heard him say other times, particularly not during a lecture. He actually gave a full lecture. Mostly it was all about kirtan, chanting, and dancing. Some of the things he said at that time, he remarked that melodic instruments, including harmoniums, he said, are not meant for kirtans. I heard him say it a couple other times also. Specifically, he said harmoniums are not meant for kirtans. Melodic instruments in general are what he mentioned that day. He said, and he explained it. The only time I ever heard him explain it, he said that because the ear will naturally follow music. So as soon as there are musical strains, the ear will follow them automatically, right? And when the ear is following the music, the attention is divided from the mantra. He said rhythm instruments are good for kirtan because they make one more inclined to dance, and dancing in turn unlocks devotion. He liked graceful dancing, and he used to use Jayatirthas. He was a very graceful dancer. As he said, see how he dances, it is very good. This will help to feel more devotion. But anyway, that day he specifically said that rhythm instruments are good, but not melodic instruments. And another time, around that same time, he told Vishnu John one day, who was in his room, Vishnu John told me right afterward, that he did not like melodies that had long extended notes in them. Like we used to sing, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He heard us singing that melody, and then right afterward he remarked to Vishnu John, don't do like that. He liked all the melody to be filled up with mantra. During the lecture that he gave that day, he said also don't harmonize during the response. In other words, the leader may sing little variations, but the group should sing basically a steady response, and that one person shouldn't be singing one melody and another melody during the response. Right? So these things, he said, that would help one to pay more attention to the mantra as one was chanting and dancing, and that way one would get the maximum benefit, and the kirtan would also become more ecstatic. He also said that the dancing should be graceful and gentlemanly. And then he came down from the Vyasa-san during the second kirtan. It was the first time I ever experienced him dancing with us. He came down right in the middle of the kirtan party and danced with us. And, you know, first he held his hands like this, and he danced back and forth with what we call the Swami or the Prabhu step or whatever you want to call it. And he did it very gracefully, you know. He'd kind of take a step into each way. He moved his foot back and forth, and then after a while he put his hands up like this, and he started leaping up in the air, up, up, straight up and down though, not shaking his body around, but with his hands up and just leaping right up into the air, and his hands were going like this as he went up. And he kept leaping and leaping and leaping, and we were doing it with him, and I got tired. And actually I stopped and started to dance back and forth again at one point, and here I am, I'm what, 21, 22 years old at the time. I was 21 when I moved into the temple. I must have been about 22. And he was over 70. I think he was about 71 or something like that, or more than that, in his early 70s at the time. And Prabhupada went right on leaping for a long time during that kirtan. He seemed to have no physical exhaustion from it at all. And it really impressed me, because I thought, here, I mean, I play basketball, right? And here this guy can jump more than I can. I shouldn't say guy, but I mean, that's the kind of thoughts that were going through my mind. I was just amazed. And it was the first time I'd ever seen him dance, and here he was right in the midst of us, and he was leaping and leaping for a long time during the kirtan. I had gotten up one morning so cold. It was very cold. We didn't expect it to be so cold, because it was midwinter in northern India, and I'd given my sleeping bag to somebody in New York on the way over in exchange for an old suitcase. And so I wound up I was lucky to have a quilt to wrap up in that was warm enough, so I wrapped up again afterward. I couldn't get up for Hartik, and until I heard him chanting. And Prabhupada, I think, might have been leading the kirtan, or he was chanting. I could hear him because it was a microphone. I could hear his voice. So I got myself up, I got myself dressed, and I went into the pandal where Prabhupada was having the Mangal Arati kirtan at one end of it for the deities there and like that. And I remember him saying, he was talking about a jamil. And he'd been talking for some lectures about prayashchitta, which means atonement procedures for atoning for sins. And he said the problem is that you atone, but you do not get the seed of sinful desire out, and therefore you do it again. So you have to go through the atonement again and again. So atonement is not the solution. One has to purify the heart. And then he was talking about how chanting does this, how it purifies and eventually cleanses even the seeds of sinful desire from the heart. He said, but then he said, and I never forget this, he said, but do not be impatient, he said. He said, after all, it took me 30 years to chant in this way. Right? And sometimes I thought he was giving those Ajamil lectures for me, because it might be my fate, I don't know. But one way or the other way, when he said that, I made a deep impression on me. Some people hypothesized that Prabhupada was this or that. He said a few things in India about his past life and things, and that day he said it took him 30 years to chant with the devotion that he did chant with, or the purity that he did chant with. So I always took it from his own words that he was a person who, well, later on in Calcutta, he said, one day he said, I don't know where he heard, maybe it was from an astrologer or from some other source, but Prabhupada said, in my previous life I was a doctor, and I led a sinless life. Therefore, I was able to take up devotional service seriously in this life. That's how he described it. And then that day he described a little bit about his own devotional development, that he said it had taken him 30 years of chanting to reach the stage at which he was chanting, which was obviously with pure, ecstatic love. Prabhupada had once said in response to another question while I was in Calcutta that when one leaves one's body, having become a pure devotee, he goes to take another birth, but on the planet where Krishna is appearing. And he meets Krishna outside for the first time in another embodiment, but on the planet where Krishna is having his avatar. And then when Krishna leaves that planet, the devotee goes with him back to the spiritual sky for good. So actually, there's one more birth after one becomes a pure devotee, but it's not like a material birth because it's a birth with Krishna where he's appearing in his pastimes, and then one goes to the spirit to Goloka with him at that time. Another time in India, he told me in his room in Calcutta, another time he said that, I asked him, because you're a devotee of Radha Krishna. Does that mean we're all inherently devotees of Radha and Krishna? And he said, not necessarily. And I said, so we might also be devotees of, say, Lakshmi Narayan or Sita Ram? And he said, yes. I said, am I to understand that by doing this process, however, whatever our relationship with Krishna in any of his forms is, it will be uncovered? And he said, yes again. So he told me specifically that not every devotee would become ultimately attached. Because I was thinking about the story of Murari Gupta in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, whom Lord Chaitanya says, you are a pure devotee of Lord Ramachandra, that you're Hanuman, right? So not, so in other words, there are some devotees that are constitutionally attached to other forms of the Lord, but Radha Krishna contains all of those forms within. So we were in a spot that by purification we would find out what our relationship was going to be. At least that's what he told me in Calcutta. We stayed in a house for a while, and Prabhupada had an apartment, and Dayananda and Nandarani, Dayananda was a temple president actually, he had a bungalow. And for a while we were having kirtans in this bungalow, which was in a set, like, they were like bungalow motel, little hotel rooms sort of, but they were in a bungalow arrangement, and that's where Dayananda was living. And the place wasn't too much bigger than this room we're in right now, just maybe only a few feet wider and about the same length, I believe. It wasn't really very big. And it would be like 30 or 40, more than 30, about 40 or even 45 of us packed into this little room with Prabhupada, including a couple of guests that we brought along or whatever. But mostly those evening Bhagavad Gita classes were just him sitting in a chair at one end of the room and the rest of us all packed in. I remember one time we just got a new dhoti cloth, and it was just, it was like Dacron cotton, orange, or polyester. It was polyester cloth that we gotten from a store in LA by a big sheath, and we just cut dhotis out of it. And someone had sewed up some kurtas, so it was for the first time we had standard clothes to go out in the street. Otherwise it was the typical Hare Krishna ragamuffins on the street. Then we had all the same color dhotis, right? So we came to Kirtan that night, and Prabhupada was looking around, and then everybody was there, but Jayananda wasn't there. And Prabhupada looked up and he said, where is Jayananda? Not Jayananda, it was Jayananda. Where is Jayananda? And we said, well, he's still out parking the van, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada waited until Jayananda came in the door. As Jayananda walked in, Prabhupada looked at him and smiled. He said, oh. He said, Jayananda looks just like Lord Chaitanya. And Jayananda blushed purple. He just blushed and blushed because he was really homespun, shy, humble, right? And when Prabhupada singled him out and glorified him like that, when Prabhupada was smiling as he said it too, Jayananda just blushed. Then he went in his room and he called Jayapataka in. And we were standing outside on the balcony, covered balcony at 3 Albert Road. And then Prabhupada, he went out of the temple into Prabhupada's room through a side door. So Prabhupada went in, called Jayapataka, and we were outside. Prabhupada practically roared at him. No, he said real brusquely, he said, why your complexion is greenish. And Jayapataka kind of stammered something like that. We were watching from outside, but not in the room. And then Prabhupada said, if you do not eat better, you will die. He said, these devotees, they are all looking like they are weak, he said. Right? You're not eating properly, he said. And then he said, you get so much every day. You send down for each devotee, you get so many portions of a kilogram of fresh-made curd. He said, go to the place where the sweet merchants buy curd that comes in from the countryside, and buy curd, so much for each devotee every day. Fry it with a little salt and asafoetida, he said, and give it to the devotees, right? That one thing. And basically, more of the more substantial kind of food. We were doing a lot of puffies and a lot of, just dal chapatis and puffies was not quite making it for us, And basically it was, Prabhupada really kind of came in and saved us immediately. He saw that there was practically malnourishment was setting in the temple at that time. Prabhupada came in the temple room. It was a nice kirtan. I remember Prabhupada remarking, so on one side there was blazing fire, and on the other side there was Radha and Krishna, because there was a nice Radha Krishna deities being worshipped really nicely. Jamuna was there, Kausalya, Chitralekha were taking, Devananda Swami were taking care of the deities. Lots of those little white flowers and champak garlands, and it smelled nice and it looked pretty. It was very refreshing to see the deities there. And there was a window behind them, so light would come in, and sometimes black bees would come in and fly around the deities and land on a flower or two and then go out again. Prabhupada told, I think it was Kosalya or Jamuna, he said, when those black bees come, that is a good sign that Krishna is very pleased with the deity worship. But anyway, while he was on the Vyasa, I remember he said on one side there was a blazing fire, and he pointed like toward the street end of the building, because Calcutta's Calcutta. And on the other side there was Radha and Krishna. People do not know that there is an alternative, so we have to give them that alternative. I remember that. One day we were going to go over to one of the Gaudiya Math. There were several different Gaudiya Math ashram places in Calcutta, several maths, and we were going to one of them. And I knew that this particular math had a bookstore where they would have all kinds of the old Gaudiya Math publications, some of which are now quite rare, right? So Prabhupada and I were standing in the doorway of the Albert Road Temple, and I remember asking him, I said, Srila Prabhupada, I know that, I take it that your books are all we really need, but at the same time, I know that they're going to have several books here. For example, you told Bali Mardan once that if you read Brahma Samhita, he'd become a very good preacher. I was wondering if it would be all right if I bought the Brahma Samhita and any of the other books that they have to study, right? Since we're going to be going to this place. So Prabhupada looked at me, and he answered, and basically there were three parts to the answer. I'll see if I can remember almost exactly what he said. I'll try to be as close as I can on it. Of course, it was a long time ago, but I remember this very clearly. He said, for one thing, he said, I do not think that you will be able to understand these books very well. He said, my Guru Maharaj was not very pleased with the sincerity of most of his disciples. And he wrote his books in a very difficult language so that even almost none of his disciples could understand them. Then he said, and I think this is a direct quote, he said, actually, my Guru Maharaj wrote those books for me. Only I could understand them. Another thing he said at the same time was that he said anything published by the Gaudiya Math after 1932 we shouldn't read, because by that time political things were entering into the edited literatures that were being printed. And he said, don't read anything printed by Gaudiya Math after 1932. And I said, didn't your Guru Maharaj pass in 1936? He said, yes, but in the last 4 years he was infirm. And he was not directly supervising the printing anymore. Right? I mentioned that one time to some other devotees. Some of them had became connected with the Chaitanya Saraswat Math in the San Jose Center, and they denied that he could have said that. They said he couldn't have said that, because Bhaktisiddhanta lived until 1936. Right? It was about reading some other publications that I said, well, I'm not so confident about them if they were printed after 1932. It was a version of Jaiva Dharma, which of course by Bhaktivinoda, there's no problem with it, but there may have been some problem in the text. One way or the other way, that's what he said to me that day. And the final thing he said was, and besides that, he said, an intelligent disciple takes what his spiritual master provides for him as being sufficient for him. I believe it was in the spring, well, it was in the year of 1975, I'm almost positive it was 1975, that Gurudas Prabhu took sannyas, which he maintained then for some time afterward. And it took place at the Stewart Street Temple in Berkeley. And Prabhupada gave a lecture that day that was a very nice lecture, and part of it was, which was amusing to me, is that he spoke just as highly, if not more highly, of Jamuna than he did of Gurudas. And at one point, referring to Jamuna, he said, and his wife, meaning Gurudas's wife, he said, and his wife, she was practically a sannyasini. So after the program was over, and Prabhupada was on his way back to his room, I was walking beside him, and I asked him if I could ask a quick question, and he said yes. And I asked him if it were conceivable, because I kind of had a premonition that it might come up someday. I asked if it was conceivable that someday women in our movement might formally take sannyas. Prabhupada looked at me. He made a very disgusted expression on his face. He went, never. And he said it with more vehemence than I just put into it. It was an emphatic answer, and that's exactly what he said. From his point of view, that was not a possible situation. And I only put that here because I thought it has already now come up, and that was his opinion about for the future.
Hare Krishna. So I would, Dhanan Pranam Maharaj. So I would share the introduction of Prabhuji. And so about Revatinandana Prabhu, he is one of the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada who had joined in just a second. Yeah. So he joined ISKCON in San Francisco in the year 1969 at the age of 23. However, we heard in the lecture that he was also very young when he used to be around Srila Prabhupada. And in the same year, he moved to Los Angeles to help open a new temple. And he was recognized early as one of the enthusiastic and fearless preacher. So, about the basic introduction of Prabhuji, uh, he is very known for his deep sincerity, intellectual strength, and dedication for spreading Krishna consciousness. About his services, after about 1 year in the moment, he was sent to Saint Barbara to open a temple. And this service reflected the deep trust placed in him by his ISKCON leadership, and he quickly became known for his energy, leadership, and Sankirtan spirit. He was known for establishing and managing temples, organizing book distribution and preaching programs, training new devotees, and delivering lectures rooted strongly in philosophy. About service in India, later in 1971, he traveled to India to help Srila Prabhupada establish ISKCON in India. He accepted sannyas here. Srila Prabhupada entrusted him with major responsibilities, including financial and organizational matters. About preaching in UK from 1972 to 1974, he was mainly based in the United Kingdom, and Srila Prabhupada personally encouraged his preaching among youth, colleges, and new centers. His work helped lay strong foundations for ISKCON in England and Europe. About the trust and recognition from Srila Prabhupada, he was recognized as a thoughtful writer who could strongly present Krishna conscious philosophy. Prabhupada especially appreciated his ability to challenge materialistic ideas. So, about the philosophical strength, which I have got some points, that he was known for the strong grounding in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. He had a very clear articulation of Vaishnava theology, and he emphasized on disciplined spiritual practice. So this was the reason he was known for, and Srila Prabhupada had promoted him that he should be guiding devotees. About cooking and creative service, Revatinandana Prabhu was well known as an excellent cook. Srila Prabhupada encouraged him to compile a cookbook with proceeds benefiting the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. His service combined devotion, creativity, and practical outreach. About the later years, in later years, he lived a very quiet and simple life, mostly in Hawaii. He passed away in Honolulu on 16th December 2021 after a short illness. And he was very much surrounded by devotees, and thus he had left this world peacefully. So, about his legacy, he was a very fearless person, especially debating with the materialistic ideas. He was very strong about it, and he was known for it actually. His life reflects his sacrifice for the expansion of this moment. So, about remembering Srila Prabhupada, in the mid 70s, Nitai Das, a devotee, Sanskrit scholar, started hearing from a Brijbasi Goswami and left ISKCON as a result. Nitai claimed that Prabhupada had not given us all the information we needed. He criticized Prabhupada for not telling his disciples about their eternal rasa with Krishna. So in Berkeley in 1976, I asked Prabhupada, are there any matters concerning the nature of our devotional service and our relationship with Krishna that you have not explained to us? In the future, Will it be necessary for us to find someone else for this more instructions? Or if we follow your prescription for sadhana, sankirtan, preaching and chanting, will our hearts be purified so that Krishna will reveal subsequent things to us from within? When I said the latter part, Prabhupada smiled and said, yes, that is the way. You will not have to go anywhere else. If you simply follow my instructions, everything will be revealed to you from within. He had a pleasant look. It was clear to me that there was no need for information about our rasa because everything is revealed to a pure hearted devotee. Jai Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So in the lecture also we heard many things which Prabhuji directly shared, especially even when we were closing the lecture at 6 o'clock, there was a very important points. So we have been seeing that such amazing devotees are there who have been associating with Srila Prabhupada with along the years from late 60s to so many years where Srila Prabhupada was here. So personally there are many things which aren't revealed in the scriptures, but from their uh, association and guidance, we can get to know many things which Srila Prabhupada wanted us to do. So Jai His Grace Revatinandana Prabhuji ki Jai. Raj, would you like to add anything to this?
No, it's fine. Thank you. Leela Purushottam, do you want to add something? You have to unmute yourself first.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, we can hear.
Carry on. Oh, I can't. My
You
video is not.
video off.
It doesn't
Okay.
matter. I'm very much impressed by Revatinandana Prabhu's total surrender and devotional service to at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. Revatinandana Prabhu ki Jai.
Thank you, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go from.
Yeah.